Welcome to our podcast today. Champions are built. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
And this is Coach Aaron, the source. EJ, we're going to do a subject today. Don't know how much I have to put into it, but it's just, again, I think it's timely for this time of year and something that parents should talk about or at least start to consider. We just did our podcast on there's a reason for every season. And that kind of just went over mapping out maybe your calendar year and figuring out when should I train? When should I take breaks? When should I do skill development? When should I compete and play? And I think this is a good companion podcast to that in terms of what we're going to call this one is what's the real cost of training? And what I mean by that is when parents are putting together their athletic calendar, starting to figure out how do I spend my resources? And when I'm saying resources, I'm saying time, money, and energy. Okay. And what do all of these things cost me? And am I, and what's the return I'm expecting from some of these? This way, you know how to divvy up your resources and you know how to divvy up your time and you know how to divvy up, everything that's going to be involved so that you can maximize each of these aspects of your athletic development. And again, I see in youth sports, whether it's baseball, basketball, soccer, everyone kind of jumps on this train that just never stops. God, there's this sci-fi movie. It just came into my head about this train that's post-apocalyptic, and everyone's living on this train, and this train just circles the earth, circles the earth, and they never really get off this train. And that kind of reminds me of the situation that parents find themselves in is they get on this AAU train or they get on this travel baseball train or this, travel club soccer thing, and they step on, it's all aboard, and then they're stuck because they just don't know how to disembark. And so, they get caught up in the time suck that it takes away from maybe other things that they want to do with their families. And it starts to ask for more and more monetary resources. And it starts to, so there's all of these sacrifices that they find themselves making. And so what I hope to do is maybe talk about this so that these parents can get some semblance of control back into their lives. And I think you get that control by doing the planning, knowing why you're doing things, the reason for every season, right, and understanding the cost benefit of when you participate in an activity, what it's costing you in time, money, resources, mental energy, all those sorts of things, and what that versus some of the sacrifices you have to make. And so that way you can make clearer decisions on, do I really need to do this baseball camp or this soccer camp or this football camp?
Yeah.
Am I doing it because everyone else is doing it? Am I doing it because I'm going to get XYZ out of it? So that's the sort of mental gymnastics I want people to start to at least initially ask before they just kind of feel themselves pulled in. And they've got one ticket to ride with no transfers and no way to get off this crazy train that's youth athletics. Yeah. Anyway, what's your thoughts?
It's like a nonstop flight, Aaron.
Yeah.
From coast to coast. And then you go to one coast, you go to the other coast, and it never stops. That's what I think this is sometimes for a lot of families. And you need to pump the brakes because, in the baseball world that I'm in, Aaron, and parents ask me this a lot that are in our club, should we go to this showcase? Should we do this? Should we do that? I heard we need to do that. I like to tell everyone, don't believe the chatter you hear around you in the stands or out on the sidelines or wherever you're at. That's just chatter. Um, Understand your son or daughter and what they're going through and what you're taking your family through in order to really do this. So I would, great subject matter today, the real cost of training. And having a plan, as we said, and reason for the season, it's super important, Aaron. And I think you don't always have to do what everybody else does, and that's not the answer. And I think a lot of families who are in, whether it's a club of any sport, they think that's how this really is. But the more I talk to professional athletes, Aaron, and the more that you and I look at our experiences, that's far from what really happens sometimes. Um, it seemed like there was planning. I talked to a lot of, athletes, baseball athletes, and what did you do? And they might say, yeah, I played football, I played basketball, I did a lot of stuff. I go, when did you specialize? When it was the right time. Some of them said my sophomore and junior in high school when I was being recruited in my particular sport, then I decided that I wanted to play this sport, and that's what I did. And I think that's important because, you start to evaluate what is the real cost. Is it really hurting me by not going to this tournament and playing it in front of these people? I always say this, are you really ready to go do that? You know? So the real cost of training, time, energy, and the financial side of it, um, plays a major part of it. And there's a lot of sacrifices. And I just tell the people, I said, listen, if you're gonna do something, have a plan with it. Just don't do it because people tell you to do it. So that's kind of like my initial thoughts with it, Aaron, about there is always a cost involved, and that cost is not always about money.
Right.
It's not always about money, man.
And so I kind of want to break off from that in the sense of just kind of looking at from a training standpoint and get a little bit more nuts and bolts.
Mm-hmm.
So, the cost of training, I guess on my side, some of the things you want to consider um, is what type of training do you want for your athlete? Do you want generic training or do you want specialized training? And what's that worth to you? What's that going to cost you in time and effort, and what's going to be the payback on that? For instance, I'm getting a lot more requests from younger and younger athletes.
Mm.
I mean, I'm getting calls from parents who've got 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and I'm like, can't do it.
Oh.
Even though I understand,
Mhm.
there's a part of me that knows that a lot of these kids are underdeveloped, and it's kind of like, well, when do you start some of that stuff, and what's overkill and what's appropriate.
Right.
And because there's a lack of PE in sport and in the school system, and the kids aren't as exposed to as many sports and movement skills, they do get limited, or they get one-dimensional because they just play one sport, they specialize in one sport. I understand the need for it, but I also think that you got to be careful. And I think it's overkill to go spend, and again, to spend 125, $150 for a training session on a 6 or 7-year-old sometimes, unless there are really some developmental issues in their movement skills. Do you understand what I'm saying? If it's an
Absolutely.
average kid,
Yeah, I
leave
wouldn't
them
do it.
alone.
Yeah,
You have a kid who really walks wonky, and and
yeah.
really has problems with his balance and coordination,
Mhm.
it may be appropriate.
Yes.
It may be appropriate. But beyond that, you got to be careful of having that expectation of wanting performance out of that. To me, you should just be the benefit of that is getting him to normalcy, not trying to make him look like the next, you know, Jim Brown. Date myself.
You
You know
said
what I'm saying? LeBron
Brown.
James, whatever.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that's something that should be considered. Always think about, do I need general training? Do I need specific training? And what's the benefit at this point in time for my athlete? And for those of you who are really looking for high performance results for a kid that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, you're dreaming. You should be looking for solid, middle of the road movement skills. Another thing is, a lot of parents, you got to trust the process. And I know it's hard to hand your kid off to somebody. I mean, it's easy for those who don't know much. But I have a saying, because I always say this to repair guys who come to my house, and they'll ask me, "Oh, so do you know much about this?" And I'm just one of those guys who I like to tinker, I like to repair my own stuff. So I always tell them, "Yeah, I know enough to be annoying to you, and enough to be dangerous to myself." And sometimes you have to realize that is that sometimes you got to step back, and there's not a problem with having some information, but sometimes a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. And I see that with, again, the parents who are going online and pulling information to train their kids. Because the one thing that most instructional videos don't show, and they always fail to mention context. There should be a setup of, this is why you do this. This is who you do this with. This is the benefits you should see out of this. This is when you should do it. There should be a lot more given. And that's not when you're just pulling something off the website. So, you got to be careful. But again, what is the real cost of training? And I think you mentioned, some great things about family time, monetary, all of those things. Is this the right time to spend your resources? One of the things I tell parents right now, say, okay, great, you got the money. Don't go to this showcase just because they sent you a letter. Save that $700 for when he's a junior or a senior or whenever, when you really need that money. And now you know exactly who he needs to show up in front of. But don't go, don't do all these exploratory camps and clinics just to be doing them.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, it's funny, Aaron, I see, we talk about the real cost of training. I see athletes doing it too, man, going on to stuff, and they're training with someone, and all of a sudden they go do something else with somebody else, and they've hurt their training, their initial training. So the real cost of training is a multitude of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's very many variables that can hurt you at the end of the day. And you need to know the price tag of that, and that doesn't necessarily mean monetary price tag, but it's really costly. That topic, the real cost of training, encompasses many different ways to look at training and what you're trying to accomplish. I think a lot of parents understand, pay for solid training that can help your athletes, training that's beneficial for you, that has a purpose. And I couldn't agree with you anymore, Aaron. A 6 to 10-year-old athlete trying to get some high level athlete, training to make them like this great athlete. Good luck. Now, I wholeheartedly agree with you when you said, they have some movement issues and stuff. You want to improve, help their athleticism. It makes sense. That makes total sense to me because of way things are happening now with athletes receiving training publicly, as I'm going to mention. But I think that's valuable then. So I think parents, be careful about that. Understand that. Why are you doing it? and be smart about training.
And you mentioned something I just want to go back to real quick. And you talked about doing a lot of different things when you're already doing something else. And, basically I call it, the contamination effect, where you're maybe, for instance, someone's hitting with you,
Right.
but then now they're watching videos on hitting and they're trying to incorporate those things unbeknownst to you into what you're doing.
Right.
And that you guys have to understand, if you're basically diluting or contaminating the time and resources that you're spending over here with something else that's over here. Not to say that something else isn't good, but you have to understand that none of these things work in a vacuum. You can't say, okay, I'm going to hit with EJ, but I'm going to hold my hands like I saw this guy do, and then but that's what I see. It's like, okay, Aaron, you're going to do this work, but I saw this fun CrossFit workout. What? Or my neighbor told me about this, or just it's like, dude, that's when I turned into Jackie Childs. I told you to put the bomb on. And for those of you guys who know Seinfeld, it's Seinfeld reference. But that's what happens, and that's a cost. That's a cost, and you guys need to understand it's not just wasting money, but there's a lot of different things that affect the benefit you're trying to derive from all of these things. You can even extend that to playing for multiple teams. We've done a couple podcasts on Are You All In? That's that also kind of talks to this subject. So, again, I know we went kind of all over the place with this, but it's just kind of something I want people to kind of always zero back in on. What is the real cost of this activity that I'm doing? And is it worth it based on the parameters I set for myself that are important?
Well said, Aaron. Well said. Hey, that's us. Champions are built. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
This is Jackie Childs, the source.